The courtroom in Miami buzzed with the low hum of routine, clerks murmuring, lawyers flipping files, the judge's gavel tapping lightly on polished oak. It was supposed to be just another Thursday morning, but as the heavy doors opened and Pam Bondi walked in, something shifted. She wasn't surrounded by cameras, no entourage, no bravado, just a crisp navy blue suit, a leather-bound folder under her arm, and that calm but razor-edged confidence only she carried. Every eye in the room turned, not because she demanded it, but because she owned it. At the bench sat Judge Harold C. McMillan, a man whose reputation preceded him in whispers. Smart, smug, and shielded. No one ever questioned his rulings. No one dared. Pam did. The case? On paper, a procedural hearing regarding suppressed evidence in a corporate fraud trial. Nothing headline-worthy. Until Bondi raised her hand and said, "Before we proceed, Your Honor, I'd like to ask the court to recognize a potential conflict of interest." Judge McMillan blinked. "Excuse me?" Pam didn't flinch. "I have reason to believe this court has knowingly withheld material connections between Your Honor and a board member of the accused corporation." The silence that followed could have broken glass. A snicker escaped from the defense table. The judge leaned forward, a thin smirk forming across his face. "Ms. Bondi, is this a courtroom or a conspiracy podcast?" The laughter was quiet, dismissive, dangerous. Pam didn't blink. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Then perhaps, Your Honor, you'd like to explain why your private legal consultancy received $72,000 in advisory fees from the Eastern District Accountability Council, a group chaired by that very board member less than 3 months ago." The judge stopped smiling. The defense team went pale. Pam remained still. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had the facts. And now the room was listening. And that was just the beginning. Judge McMillan adjusted his glasses, buying time. His fingers tapped once, twice against the bench, but his voice betrayed nothing. "Ms. Bondi, are you implying misconduct?" Pam didn't move. "I'm not implying anything. I'm submitting documentation. I request it be entered into the court record before proceedings continue." The clerk hesitated, eyes darting to the judge. But protocol was protocol. The document was accepted, time-stamped, and placed on the bench. McMillan's jaw tensed. "This is irrelevant to the case before us." Pam took a step forward. "On the contrary, it strikes at the heart of judicial impartiality. If the bench is compromised, the process is invalid. That's not theory, Your Honor. That's federal law." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was silent now, not out of order, but out of awe. A few young associates near the gallery leaned forward, as if realizing for the first time they weren't watching a routine hearing, but a reckoning. The defense attorney stammered, "Your Honor, we object to this entire line of argument. It's a distraction." Pam turned slowly. "Then you should welcome the truth. Distractions dissolve when facts arrive." Judge McMillan's fingers curled tighter around the edge of his bench. His voice dropped an octave. "If you persist, Ms. Bondi, I will hold you in contempt." Pam didn't blink. "I'd rather be held in contempt than complicit." It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a challenge, a line in the sand. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing, but something had changed. His authority, so absolute just minutes ago, was beginning to tremble under the weight of his own record. Pam knew it. So did the room. But this wasn't about ego. It was about what came next, and what she was about to reveal. Pam reached down, pulled another folder from her briefcase, this one thicker, secured with a red tab and a handwritten label. Exhibits, Judicial Conflict of Interest. She laid it gently on the desk, like a final card in a game only she knew how to play. "This," she said calmly, "contains a series of correspondences, financial disclosures, and calendar entries. Each one cross-referenced, each one public record, all pointing to the same conclusion." Judge McMillan shifted in his seat. "I'm sure the court is familiar with the Thompson Litigation Group," she continued, her tone light but slicing. "The same firm that has appeared in front of this bench 7 times in the last 3 years, and won 6. No one spoke. According to these documents, Pam went on, flipping open the file, Judge McMillan's brother-in-law sits on the board of Thompson, and if anyone here doubts that connection, I have something better. Photographs of them together at a corporate retreat last summer, in Aspen. There it was. The room didn't gasp, but it exhaled. Slowly, heavily, as if it had been holding its breath since the first word. The judge sat forward. His voice was hoarse, almost hollow now. That has no bearing. It has every bearing, Pam interrupted, sharp as glass. Because if there is even the appearance of bias, just the appearance, this court cannot move forward without review. And if the court declines to act, I'll file a motion for recusal and elevate this matter to the Judicial Ethics Committee before the ink dries. She paused. Or, she added, you can save the system some paperwork and do what should have been done the moment you saw my name on the docket. The judge looked down at the documents in front of him. He didn't reach for the gavel. He didn't reach for his notes. He just sat there, frozen, but Pam wasn't done. Not yet. The clerk's fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure whether to transcribe silence or hold for what might come next. A faint mechanical buzz from the overhead lights filled the courtroom, mingling with a sense of slow-building dread. Pam stood still. She wasn't rushing. She didn't need to. Every second of hesitation from the bench only made her case stronger. She picked up a single sheet from the folder, highlighted portions, post-it flags, dates circled in pen. Your Honor, this email exchange, she said, lifting it slightly for emphasis, was obtained through a FOIA request filed 6 months ago. It shows Judge McMillan's chambers communicating directly with counsel from Thompson Group outside scheduled hearings, coordinating timing, suggesting preferred language for briefs. The judge looked up, eyes narrowing but not in denial. In recognition, Pam didn't blink. The language used wasn't just informal, it was collusive, and I quote, "We'll move the hearing to midweek, more favorable crowd in the gallery, less press presence." A collective stiffness gripped the courtroom. The air had changed. What started as a disagreement about an argument had become something deeper. Exposure. Your Honor, at this point, I'm not just questioning your impartiality. I'm questioning the legitimacy of every ruling connected to Thompson Group that passed through this courtroom. The judge's hand trembled slightly as it moved toward the gavel. He didn't strike it, just hovered there as if waiting for the permission to stop this before it collapsed completely. And yet Pam kept going, measured, unwavering. The public trusts this room, she said, gesturing softly around them. They trust that when they walk through those doors, justice isn't being managed through inboxes and vacation photos. They trust the robe. Now she stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the calm certainty of someone who had nothing left to prove. If this trust is broken even once, then it's not the litigants who lose faith. It's the system that begins to rot. And with that, she placed the email on the judge's desk. No anger, no triumph, just truth. Still, not a word from the bench. But the silence had shifted. It wasn't defensiveness anymore, it was fear. Judge McMillan finally moved, sliding the sheet of paper Pam had handed him closer, his fingers tightening slightly as he read. The courtroom was silent, but the pressure was deafening. Pam had just pulled back the curtain, and now everyone could see what lay behind it. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. These communications, he began, carefully choosing his words, are taken out of context. Pam tilted her head. Then let's put them in context, Your Honor. She walked back to the table, unfolded another document. This internal memo was sent from your clerk's office to legal counsel representing Thompson Group, dated 3 days before the rescheduling. It states, preferred dates acknowledged. The judge agrees midweek minimizes coverage. Whispers rose from the back of the courtroom. A journalist leaned forward. One of the defense attorneys lowered his eyes. Pam placed the second document gently beside the first, like chess pieces locking into position. This isn't about context. It's about coordination. This court was tailored to serve a narrative, not the law. Judge McMillan tried to regain his composure. Are you accusing this court of corruption, Ms. Bondi? She didn't flinch. I'm accusing this court of abandoning its responsibility, and I'm giving you every opportunity to respond, with evidence, not rhetoric." The judge leaned back, his jaw tight. For the first time in his long tenure, the power of the bench felt fragile. The robe, the title, the gavel. None of them offered protection against a truth laid bare in ink and time-stamped emails. Pam continued, her voice steady but relentless. "This isn't just misconduct, it's betrayal. And if we don't stop it here now, then what's the point of any of this?" She wasn't just speaking to the judge anymore. She was speaking to the courtroom, the public, the system itself. And it was listening. The next move, it wouldn't come from her. Judge McMillan didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the documents in front of him, but his mind was clearly somewhere else, trying to calculate how far this could go, how much had already slipped beyond his control. Pam stood still, not pressing the moment. She knew this kind of silence well. It was the sound of a man realizing the room was no longer his. Then came a sound no one expected, the soft shuffle of the court clerk rising from her chair. "Your Honor," she said hesitantly, "we've received an inquiry from the State Bar Association. They're asking for today's full transcript. Live." Gasps weren't audible, but the tension rippled like wind through dry leaves. McMillan's voice was strained now. "Tell them it will be delivered." His authority wasn't gone, not yet, but it was fraying, unraveling thread by thread in front of an audience that had suddenly remembered it had a voice. Pam slowly turned toward the gallery, not to gloat, to gauge. The reporters who had entered the courtroom expecting a routine hearing were now scribbling furiously. Every word from Pam, every pause from the judge, it all meant something now. A narrative was forming, and it wasn't one the court had authored. She stepped closer to the bench again, this time lowering her tone. "I don't want a spectacle, Your Honor. I want accountability. I want to believe that the seat you hold still means something beyond influence, beyond networks." Her voice cracked slightly, not weakness, but clarity sharpened by truth. "Because if we let this slide, if we let this become the standard, then what happens next time, when no one's watching?" McMillan stared at her, but his eyes had changed. There was no more pushback, no more posturing, just a man behind a bench calculating how much longer he could pretend not to see the tide. And Pam, she was just getting started. By the time the lunch recess was called, the courtroom was no longer a courtroom. It was a pressure cooker, and Pam Bondi had just turned up the heat. Outside, the courthouse steps were crawling with reporters. The leak had begun. Someone inside had sent out the transcript draft, and it was already trending online. "Judge accused of hiding conflict of interest," read one headline. Another? "Pam Bondi just put a federal judge on notice." Inside the clerk's office, phones rang in quick succession. Aides whispered. A low-level staffer texted a colleague, "This isn't just a hearing anymore. It's a purge." Pam sat alone in a side room, not checking her phone, not rehearsing new lines, just thinking. Because she knew what came next wasn't a matter of evidence. It was narrative. And right now, the narrative was swinging in her direction. Meanwhile, Judge McMillan wasn't in his chambers. He was in a private hallway, meeting quietly with legal counsel assigned to the ethics committee. No cameras, no record. But word traveled. Pam's team had already anticipated the next move. Within hours, her legal advisor had filed an emergency motion, requesting that the judge disclose all financial and professional ties to the two lobbying groups she had named earlier. And that's when things cracked wide open. One of those groups had, in fact, hosted a private dinner, closed to media, just 3 months prior. The guest list was short, selective. And on it? Judge McMillan. Photos surfaced. Grainy but damning, a toast, a conversation, a moment frozen in time where lines blurred between justice and influence. Pam didn't need to say anything. The internet did it for her. "Is this your neutrality?" read one viral tweet. "Turns out Bondi wasn't making noise, she was making history," said another. McMillan's silence was no longer strategy. It was liability. Pam's voice, steady and factual, had exposed not just a man, but the rot that had quietly spread through places meant to be sacred. And now, the people were watching. All of them. The next morning, the courthouse looked different. Not physically, but in weight. There was a heaviness now. Cameras lined the sidewalk, satellite trucks parked like sentinels, and clusters of people murmured outside the stone steps as if something sacred was about to be dismantled. Judge McMillan entered through the side door, escorted by 2 federal marshals. He wasn't under arrest, not yet, but the optics were unmistakable. He didn't speak, didn't look up. His usual confidence, the tight posture, the polished stride, had flattened into something far more human and far more defensive. Pam Bondi arrived moments later. No entourage, no spectacle. Just a folder in one hand and her reputation in the other. The energy shifted the moment she stepped through the double doors, reporters whispered. Staffers glanced. Even McMillan's own law clerk looked unsure. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a kind of quiet tension, only felt when the people in charge know they've lost control of the narrative. And then, it began. Pam stood not with outrage but with precision. "Your Honor," she said, "I submit into Record Exhibit 7-C, a transcript of a private roundtable dinner attended by the presiding judge, during which legal strategy was discussed with parties financially tied to the current case." Gasps. Not from the crowd. This wasn't a movie. But from the lawyers seated behind McMillan's bench, the ones who thought this was still just a procedural fight. Pam didn't look at McMillan when she said it. She looked at the jury. She looked at the American flag behind them. She was speaking to more than just this courtroom. She was speaking to the system that had protected men like him for far too long. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The judge, still silent, still composed, but that silence no longer read as control, it read as fear. Pam continued. "Additionally, Your Honor, we submit testimony from a former ethics investigator who, under seal, has confirmed internal warnings were issued against Judge McMillan's continued involvement in policy-related rulings. These warnings were ignored. The courtroom didn't erupt. It froze. Everyone understood what was being said. Pam had just accused a sitting judge not just of conflict of interest, but of knowingly bypassing internal checks. She wasn't implying corruption anymore. She was indicting it. McMillan leaned forward. Finally, his voice low. "Ms. Bondi, you are treading dangerously close to contempt." But she didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor," she said calmly. "I am treading directly on the truth." He stared at her. She stared back. This time the gavel didn't fall. This time the system didn't shield its own. Instead, a voice from the gallery, clear, certain, broke the silence. It's time someone did. And for the first time all day, Pam allowed herself the faintest breath of victory. But she wasn't finished yet. Because what came next wasn't about legal arguments or sealed records. It was about the verdict that wasn't written on paper, but in the minds of every person watching. Was this still justice, or had it always been theater? And that answer was coming. The tension in the room was palpable, like a storm gathering just before it broke. The courtroom had fallen into an eerie silence, everyone seemingly holding their breath. The lawyers in the back row shuffled in their seats. The media crew outside prepared for the next momentous sound, the gavel. Pam didn't move. She didn't even look at the judge anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the room. The cameras, the jurors, the public. They were all witnesses to something bigger than just a courtroom drama. The judge shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. His fingers tightened on the gavel. But the courtroom air was thick with something other than authority. Something uncomfortable. Pam's voice, steady and calm, broke the silence. "Your Honor, this case was never about the fine. This was about who gets to control the law, who gets to decide what's right and wrong. We've heard the defense, we've heard the denials, but we've also heard the truth." There was no grand pause, no dramatic buildup. She was simply laying down the facts, and with each word, the walls around Judge McMillan seemed to close in tighter, as if his reputation, his authority, and his credibility were now drowning in the weight of his own silence. Pam turned toward the jury, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to tell you what to believe," she continued. "I'm here to make sure you understand what's at stake. The law is not a game. It's not about which side of the aisle you sit on. It's about fairness, accountability, and justice. And those who wear the robe must be held to that same standard. Her words weren't just an argument. They were a declaration. She paused, her voice lowering. Judge McMillan has broken that trust, and now we must all reckon with the consequences. A single breath could be heard in the courtroom, as everyone finally understood. Pam Bondi was no longer just representing the law. She was representing something far more fundamental, the very fabric of justice itself. She was questioning the system. And for the first time, people were starting to listen. The judge remained still, his fingers tracing the edge of the gavel. His silence was no longer the calm of control. It was the silence of a man caught in his own lie. Pam wasn't finished. Do not mistake this for a personal vendetta, Your Honor. This is about holding people in power accountable. And if you can't answer the charges I've laid out, if you can't explain why your actions, your decisions, have failed this system, then you have no place wearing that robe. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, McMillan exhaled. His eyes darkened, but it was no longer the glare of authority. It was the resignation of a man cornered. Ms. Bondi, But he didn't finish. He didn't have to. The room already knew what was happening. The truth had been exposed. Your Honor, Pam interrupted, her voice ringing with finality. I don't need you to say anything. The law speaks for itself, and the people are watching. With that, she stepped back, leaving the judge to grapple with the weight of the consequences he had spent so many years avoiding. The audience in the gallery shifted in their seats, some whispering in disbelief, others nodding in quiet approval. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. The courtroom had shifted. It was no longer about a fine or a judge, or even the law itself. It was about the system that had allowed this to happen, and the people who, like Pam, refused to stand by and let it continue. As Pam Bondi stood there, calm and resolute, she knew this wasn't just her fight. This was a turning point. The public would never look at the judiciary the same way again. It wasn't about political sides or ideological battles anymore. It was about holding those who were supposed to serve the people accountable and making sure that no matter how powerful, no one was above the law. The gavel fell. The case was over. But the ripple effect of what had just transpired would echo for years to come. Pam had won. But more importantly, she had made sure the world knew how to fight for justice, even when the odds were stacked against you.